I buried my husband 6 months ago. I stood there watching his coffin lowered into the ground, believing it was the final goodbye. I cried. I mourned. I tried to move on. Yesterday I saw him again, alive, breathing, staring right at me in a grocery store. And what happened next, no one saw coming. He didn't run to me. He didn't speak. He looked terrified. Of me. The grocery store felt too bright that afternoon. Cold white lights humming above, the kind that make everything look unreal. Margaret pushed her cart slowly, barely paying attention, until someone made her stop. A man stood by the vegetable aisle. Familiar posture. Same shoulders. Same stillness. Her breath hitched. "No, that's not possible," she whispered under her breath. Her fingers tightened around the cart. "Am I losing my mind? Or did he never die?" 5 seconds passed. Too long. Too quiet. Then the man turned. Their eyes locked. Daniel. Alive. His face drained of color the instant he recognized her. Not relief. Not shock. Fear. Pure, undeniable fear. Margaret's voice broke out before she could stop it. "Daniel." But he stepped back. And in that single moment, something inside her shattered all over again. Margaret Collins is 52 years old. The kind of woman you wouldn't notice twice in a crowd, quiet, composed, ordinary. The kind of life that makes sense. Or at least it used to. Because just hours before that moment in the grocery store, everything still followed a pattern she trusted. There was a photo on her living room wall. Same one for years. Margaret in the middle. Her daughter Emily leaning in. And Daniel. Arm wrapped around both of them, smiling like nothing in the world could break that family. "He never lied to me," Margaret once told a neighbor. Not once. And no one doubted that. Daniel Collins was dependable. Soft-spoken. The man who fixed things. The man who stayed. Which is exactly why none of it made sense. Because men like Daniel don't disappear. They don't die mysteriously. And they definitely don't come back, looking afraid of their own wife. 6 months ago, Margaret stood at a grave and said goodbye to her husband. Not symbolically. Not emotionally. Literally. "I watched them bury him," she would later say, her voice unsteady. "I signed the papers. I attended the funeral. I closed that chapter." And that's what makes this moment impossible. Because if the man in that grocery store was Daniel, if those eyes, that face, that fear were real, then something else had to be true. Something far worse. Margaret's mind snapped back to that day. Rain hitting the umbrella. The sound of dirt falling. The coffin sealed, untouched, unquestioned. She remembers asking quietly, "Are you sure it's him?" And the officer nodding. Too quickly. Now standing there, her breath shallow, one thought claws its way through everything else. If that was him, then who did I bury? The image of the coffin lingers. Closer. Tighter. And suddenly it doesn't feel closed anymore. Before everything broke, their life made sense. That's what makes it harder to accept now. Margaret and Daniel had been married for 27 years. Not dramatic. Not extraordinary. Just steady. The kind of marriage built on habits instead of surprises. Morning coffee at the same time. Dinner at the same table. Weekend grocery trips. Always together. "You don't need excitement when you have peace," Margaret once said, half smiling. And Daniel? He fit perfectly into that peace. He fixed things before they became problems. Paid bills on time. Never raised his voice. Never stayed out late. Never gave anyone a reason to question him. Too consistent. Too controlled. There was a rhythm to everything he did. Wake up. Work. Come home. Sit in the same chair. Watch the same shows. Smile at the same moments. First it felt comforting. Predictable meant safe. But over time it became something else. Margaret remembers one night watching him from across the room. He was laughing at something on TV. Same tone. Same timing. Like he'd laughed that way 1,000 times before. "Daniel, are you happy?" she asked suddenly. He didn't hesitate. "Of course I am." Too fast. Too perfect. And that was the first moment, small, almost invisible, when something inside her didn't fully believe him. Because real people pause. Real people think. But Daniel never did. But once you notice something, you can't unsee it. It started small. Almost forgettable. Daniel talked less. Not dramatically, just enough to leave space where something used to be. Short answers. Distracted nods. "You okay?" Margaret asked one evening. "Just tired," he said. Same calm tone. Same easy smile. Too easy. Then came the phone. He used to leave it anywhere, kitchen counter, couch, even the bathroom. Now it stayed with him. Always face down. Always within reach. Once it buzzed while he was in the shower. Margaret glanced at it. No name. Just a number. When he came out, she asked, "Who called?" He didn't even check. Wrong number. Too fast again. And then the money. First it was small. A few dollars missing from their savings. Then more. Nothing alarming on its own. But together? It didn't add up. "I thought we had more," Margaret said, staring at the statement. Daniel barely looked. Probably a billing delay. He moved on. She didn't. That night, lying awake beside him, one thought pressed harder than the rest. "I've ignored too many things." Silence filled the room. The phone rang. 2:13 a.m. Daniel didn't hesitate this time. He grabbed it, stood up, walked out, and closed the door behind him. The next morning felt off. Not wrong enough to panic. Just enough to linger. Daniel was already dressed when Margaret came into the kitchen. Earlier than usual. Coffee untouched. Keys in his hand. "You're leaving already?" she asked, surprised. "Got a job out of town," he replied, not meeting her eyes. That was new. He usually explained things. Small details. Where, who, how long. Today, nothing. Margaret watched him longer than usual. Something in his face didn't sit right. Not fear. Not stress. Distance. "Daniel," she called softly. He paused at the door. For a second, just a second, he looked at her. And there it was. Flicker. Something unspoken. Something final. "You okay?" she pressed. A beat. Then he smiled. "I'll be back early." Too clean. Too simple. He opened the door. Cold air slipped inside. Margaret almost said something else. Almost asked him to stay. Almost followed that instinct rising in her chest. But she didn't. The door closed slowly behind him. Click. And for reasons she couldn't explain, that sound didn't feel like goodbye. Felt like something ending for good. At first, Margaret didn't think much of it. Daniel had been late before. Jobs ran over. Traffic happened. Life delayed things. But by noon, she called him anyway. No answer. "Okay," she muttered, forcing a small breath. "He's working." She tried again an hour later. Still nothing. By 3 p.m., the silence started to feel heavier. Not loud. Just wrong. She sent a message. "Call me when you can." Delivered. No reply. By evening, the light outside faded, and something inside her shifted with it. "Daniel," she said aloud, dialing again, pacing now. "Pick up." Straight to voicemail. Too fast. That didn't happen before. Her fingers trembled slightly as she hung up. Then redialed. Then again. Nothing. No missed calls back. No explanation. No sign. Dinner stayed untouched on the table. The house, once calm, now felt hollow. Every small sound stretched too far. Every second lasted too long. By 9 p.m., she wasn't sitting anymore. She was walking. Back and forth. Phone in hand. "Where are you?" she whispered, more to the silence than to him. Her call didn't even ring. It went dead instantly. Margaret froze. No signal. No battery. Or something else. A cold realization crept in, slow but certain. This wasn't delay. This wasn't forgetfulness. Something was off. Something deeply, undeniably off. And for the first time she stopped trying to stay calm. Something is very wrong. The call to the police came just after midnight. Margaret didn't wait anymore. "I think something's wrong," she told the dispatcher, her voice tight, controlled, but barely. By morning everything moved too fast. An officer knocked. Calm face. Careful tone. "Ma'am, we may have found your husband's vehicle." Her heart dropped before she even asked where. Highway shoulder. 20 miles out. When she arrived, the scene felt unreal. Flashing lights. Yellow tape. Wind brushing against an empty stretch of road. "That's his car," she said instantly. No doubt. The driver's door was slightly open. Inside, nothing looked disturbed at first glance. Then she saw it. A dark stain on the seat. Faded. Dry. But unmistakable. Margaret stepped back. No, that's not." "Ma'am, please stay behind the line," an officer said gently. But her eyes were already locked on the car. On the silence inside it. On what shouldn't be there. Another officer walked to the back. Gloves on. Slow movement. The trunk latch clicked. Too loud. Too final. Margaret held her breath. The lid lifted. And in that single moment everything shifted from fear to something far worse. Margaret didn't see everything at first. Maybe her mind refused to. She caught only fragments. A shape. A stillness that shouldn't exist. Something wrong with the way a body lay when life was no longer inside it. Then she heard the officer's voice. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back." Too late. "What is that?" she whispered, even though part of her already knew. The officer hesitated. Just for a second. And that hesitation said more than any answer. "The condition of the body makes visual identification difficult," he finally said. Difficult. That word echoed. Margaret's eyes searched anyway, desperate, disbelieving. But the face, there was nothing to recognize. No certainty. No closure. Just damage. Time. Silence. I can't tell," she said, her voice breaking. Another officer stepped in, holding a small evidence bag. Inside a watch. Silver. Scratched along the edge. Daniel's. Margaret froze. "No, that's his. That's his watch." Then came the ring. Simple band. Worn inside. The same engraving she had chosen years ago. Her breath caught. "That's mine. I gave him that." The world tilted. Not the face. Not the body. But everything around it belonged to Daniel. Margaret shook her head slowly, as if denial could undo what was forming. "There has to be a mistake. We'll run full identification," the officer said carefully. "But DNA results may take time. Time. Too much time. Too much uncertainty." And standing there, surrounded by proof that didn't feel like truth, Margaret felt something close in on her. Not belief. Not acceptance. But something forced. Something she didn't choose. Because if all of this was his, then it had to be him. Even if it didn't feel real. They didn't ask her to look again. Maybe they already knew she wouldn't. At the station later, everything felt quieter. Too quiet. Papers slid across a desk. Voices stayed low, controlled. "Mrs. Collins," the officer began gently, placing the items in front of her. "These were recovered from the body." Margaret didn't reach for them right away. She didn't have to. The watch lay there. Scratched, worn in the exact same place where Daniel used to hit it against the kitchen counter. The ring beside it. Simple. Familiar. Final. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. But her eyes never left them. "Do these belong to your husband?" A breath that didn't quite come. "Yes," she said finally. Barely audible. "They're his." The officer nodded, writing something down. That was it. No dramatic moment. No confirmation she could fight. Just a quiet agreement that sealed everything. "We can arrange a visual identification if you prefer," he added carefully. Margaret froze. For a second the room felt smaller. Closer. "No," she said quickly. Too quickly. "That's not necessary." Because she knew what that meant. If she saw the body, really saw it, there would be no space left for doubt. No corner to hide in. No way to pretend this wasn't real. If I look, everything ends. So she didn't. She signed the forms. Answered the questions. Followed the process like someone moving through someone else's life. Grief settled in, but not cleanly. Came with weight. And something underneath it. Something quieter. Something that refused to fully disappear. Doubt. The rain started just before the service began. Soft at first. Then steady. Like the sky had decided not to hold back. Margaret stood under a black umbrella, barely aware of the people around her. Voices blurred together. Footsteps in wet grass. Everything felt distant, muted. At the center of it all, Daniel's coffin. Closed. Always closed. Emily clung to her, trembling. "Mom, this can't be real," she cried, her voice breaking into pieces. Margaret pulled her closer, but her own arms felt weak. I know, she whispered, though the words didn't carry any certainty. Because something about this felt wrong. Not loud. Not obvious. Just off. "I want to see him," Emily suddenly said, pulling back, tears streaking down her face. "Please. I need to see Dad." Margaret froze. The funeral director stepped in gently. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. The condition of the body makes that impossible. Too quick. Too final." Emily shook her head, crying harder. "No. I don't care. I just..." Margaret tightened her grip. "Emily, stop." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. Silence fell between them for a second. Then Emily looked at her, confused. Hurt. And Margaret couldn't explain why her heart was pounding so hard. Why the idea of opening that coffin felt like something dangerous. "Don't open it." The thought came suddenly. Strong. Uninvited. The priest continued speaking. Words about peace. About rest. About goodbye. Margaret didn't hear any of it. Her eyes stayed on the coffin. Still. Sealed. Untouched. Rain tapping against the wood. A strange feeling crept in, slow, cold. Not just grief. Something else. Because funerals are supposed to bring closure. But standing there, Margaret didn't feel anything closing. If anything, it felt like something was being hidden. After the funeral, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt staged. People came. One after another. Neighbors. Old friends. Faces Margaret recognized but couldn't fully process. They brought food. Flowers. Soft voices. "I'm so sorry, Margaret. If you need anything." He was a good man. She nodded. Repeated the same quiet response. "Thank you. I appreciate it." But none of it landed. Because beneath the sympathy, something else kept pressing through. A quiet, persistent thought. Something isn't right. That evening, after the last guest left, the silence returned, heavier than before. Margaret stood by the window, arms folded, staring out at the dim street. Her reflection looked unfamiliar. "I should feel closure," she whispered to herself. "Why don't I?" The question hung there. Unanswered. Movement. Across the street. A figure. Standing still. Margaret narrowed her eyes. "Hello." No response. Just a man. Tall. Unmoving. Watching. A cold tension ran through her chest. "Can I help you?" she called louder this time, stepping closer to the glass. The figure shifted slightly, then turned, and walked away. Too fast. Too deliberate. Margaret opened the door instinctively, stepping out into the cool air. Wait. Nothing. Empty street. No footsteps. No sound. As if he had never been there. She stood there longer than she should have, heart beating unevenly. Who was that? And more importantly, why did it feel like he was watching? Not the house, but me? 6 months passed, but time didn't move the way it was supposed to. It dragged. Then it stalled. Then it stopped meaning anything at all. Margaret stopped sleeping first. Not completely, just enough to break her. Hours in bed. Eyes open. Mind replaying the same moments. The car. The coffin. That sealed lid. Every night. Just sleep, she whispered to herself in the dark. Please just sleep. But silence answered. Days blurred into each other. Morning came without purpose. Night came without rest. Work didn't last long. We're concerned about you, Margaret, her supervisor said gently one afternoon. You've missed deadlines. You seem distant. I'm fine, she replied automatically. She wasn't. A week later she was let go. No argument. No resistance. Just a quiet nod. Another piece gone. After that, routines disappeared completely. Meals skipped. Calls ignored. Curtains closed. Margaret moved through the house like something hollow, present but not fully there. Once Emily tried to reach her. Mom, you can't keep doing this, she said, voice trembling. You're not even here anymore. Margaret looked at her. Tried to respond. Nothing came out. Because the truth was, she didn't feel grief the way she expected. Not anymore. It had dulled. Flattened. Turned into something colder. Not pain. Not healing. Just absence. And somewhere deep inside that emptiness, that same quiet thought still lingered. Something isn't right. For a while nothing changed. Then something did. It was small enough to ignore at first. Margaret sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her bank statement without really seeing it. Just another habit. Just another empty routine. Then her fingers stopped. A transaction. Not large. Not alarming. But unfamiliar. She frowned. That's strange. She checked again. Another one. Different date. Same pattern. Small amounts. Spread out. That can't be right. Her chest tightened slightly. Daniel used to manage most of their finances. After he was gone, Margaret barely touched the account. There shouldn't be movement like this. No, she shook her head. It's probably automatic billing. But the explanation didn't sit. That night something else appeared. An email. Subject line. Your account has been accessed. Margaret almost deleted it. Spam, she thought. Then she saw the sender. Daniel's email. Her hand froze on the mouse. That's not possible, she clicked. The message was short. Generic. A login notification from a different location. Not old. Not archived. Recent. Her breath grew shallow. Who's using this? The room felt smaller again. Like it had 6 months ago. One detail connected to another. The transactions. The email. A pattern forming. Not random. Not accidental. Margaret leaned back slowly. Her mind racing for the first time in months. Because if someone was using Daniel's account, then someone still had access to his life. And that meant one thing she wasn't ready to say out loud. Maybe he never really left. The next morning something shifted. Not dramatically. Not enough to feel like hope. Just a break in the numbness. Margaret stood in the kitchen, staring at the same unopened cabinet she had ignored for days. Then, without overthinking it, she reached for her coat. I need to get out, she said quietly. No one was there to hear it. The decision felt small, almost meaningless. But it wasn't. It was the first time in weeks she chose movement over stillness. The drive was silent. No music. No thoughts that stayed long enough to settle. Just the road ahead and a strange hollow calm. When she arrived, the grocery store looked exactly as it always had. Ordinary. Safe. Automatic doors slid open. And that light. Bright. White. Clinical. Too clean. It washed over everything. The floors. The shelves. The people moving in slow, predictable patterns. Margaret stepped inside, gripping the cart lightly. Just get what you need, she murmured to herself. Milk. Bread. Something simple. Something normal. Her footsteps echoed softly as she moved down the aisle, eyes unfocused, mind still drifting somewhere between memory and absence. Everything felt controlled, muted, like nothing could disturb this fragile quiet. And for a moment she almost believed it. Almost. Because this calm, this stillness wasn't peace. It was the pause right before something breaks. It happened in less than 5 seconds. And yet, Margaret would remember it as if time had stretched into something endless. She turned into the produce aisle, reaching for a carton of milk without really looking. Her hand stopped midair. Someone stood a few feet away. Back turned. Slightly hunched posture. Left hand resting on the cart the exact same way he always did. Her breath caught. No. Her mind reacted first. Fast. Defensive. No. That's not him. But her body didn't move. Couldn't. Her heart began to pound, slow at first, then harder. Louder. Filling her ears. Don't look. Don't look again. But she did. The man shifted slightly, adjusting something on the shelf. Same movement. Same rhythm. Margaret's fingers trembled. This isn't real, she whispered, barely audible. Her pulse spiked. Everything around her blurred. Voices faded. The hum of the store dissolved into a distant echo. Only him remained. Standing there. Alive. No, that's impossible. Her chest tightened as the thought pushed harder, breaking through every layer of denial. Because this wasn't just resemblance. This wasn't coincidence. It was exact. Down to the smallest detail her memory refused to forget. Her lips parted. No sound came out. Without warning, the man began to turn. Slow. Too slow. Margaret's vision locked in place. Her entire body rigid. Don't let it be him. A second passed. Then another. And his face came into view. Daniel. For a moment, neither of them moved. Time didn't just slow, it collapsed into that single point between them. Margaret stared, her breath gone, her mind refusing to catch up. This wasn't memory. This wasn't grief playing tricks. This was him. Alive. Daniel. Her voice finally broke through, fragile, almost unrecognizable. That's when it changed. His eyes met hers. And something snapped. Not warmth. Not relief. Fear. Instant. Raw. Unfiltered. He knew her. And he didn't want to. Margaret felt it before she understood it. The shift. The distance. The way his body tensed like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. Daniel, it's me, she said again, louder this time, stepping forward. He took a step back. Small. Quick. Instinctive. Like she was the danger. No, wait. She reached out, confusion breaking into panic. What are you doing? He didn't answer. Didn't smile. Didn't even try to explain. Instead, his eyes darted around the aisle, scanning, calculating. Looking for a way out. Margaret froze mid-step. That was the moment it hit her. This wasn't a reunion. This wasn't a miracle. This was something else. Something wrong. Because the man she buried should have been impossible to see again. But the man standing in front of her? He looked exactly like Daniel. And reacted like a stranger who had everything to hide. And he moved. Fast. Too fast for someone who had just been seen. Daniel, wait. Margaret's voice cracked as she lunged forward. Her cart hitting the shelf with a sharp, echoing sound. He didn't stop. Didn't even look back. He turned down the next aisle, pace quick, controlled but urgent. Running without running. Daniel! She called again, louder now, drawing eyes from strangers around her. Stop! It's me. No response. Margaret pushed past people, her breath breaking, heart slamming against her ribs. Her mind couldn't catch up, but her body reacted. Instinct, desperation, something deeper than logic. Why is he running? She turned the corner, empty. Just shelves. Bright lights. A woman comparing cereal boxes. Margaret spun around. Did you see him? The man who just came through here? The woman blinked. I know, I didn't notice. Of course she didn't. Margaret moved again. Faster now. Another aisle. Then another. Nothing. No sign. No movement. No trace. It was like he had dissolved into the store itself. No, that's not possible, she whispered, slowing down, her chest tightening with each breath. People stared. Confused. Curious. She didn't care. Her eyes scanned every face, every corner, every exit. Then she saw the automatic doors at the front sliding open. Too late. She ran toward them, nearly slipping as she pushed outside into the harsh daylight. Daniel. Only silence answered. Cars passing. Wind moving. No one turning back. He was gone. Margaret stood there, trembling, her pulse still racing. But something else had taken its place now. Not just confusion. Not just shock. A sharp, rising edge of something darker. Because in that moment one truth settled in, cold and undeniable. He wasn't surprised to see me. He was afraid. Afraid of her. Margaret didn't go home. Not right away. Because if she did, it might all start to feel unreal again. Instead she turned back. Straight into the store. I need to see your security footage, she said at the front desk, her voice steadier than she felt. The young employee blinked. Ma'am, we usually can't. Please, Margaret cut in sharper now. My husband is dead, and I just saw him in your store. That got attention. Minutes later, a manager arrived. Then another call. Then a small office in the back. A screen flickered on. Tell us roughly where you were, the manager said. Margaret pointed. Produce section. About 10 minutes ago. They rewound. Pressed play. Grainy footage. Overhead angle. People moving in patterns. There, Margaret whispered. The video paused. A man. Slightly hunched. Hand on the cart. The manager leaned closer. Do you recognize him? Margaret didn't answer. She stepped forward. Play it. The footage moved again. The man turned. Even through the low resolution, it was unmistakable. Daniel. Alive. Walking. Breathing. Real. The room went quiet. That's him, Margaret said, her voice flat now. No hesitation. No doubt left to protect her. That's my husband. No one argued. No one questioned it. Because the truth was no longer fragile. It was visible. Recorded. Undeniable. And for the first time since the grocery store, Margaret didn't feel confused. She felt something else rising. Hot. Sharp. Dangerously clear. Anger. Margaret didn't hesitate this time. She went straight to the police. I have proof, she said, placing her phone on the desk, the paused frame of the footage still visible. He's alive. The officer on duty frowned slightly. Ma'am, your husband was identified months ago. Not by DNA, she shot back. That stopped him. A beat. Movement. Files were requested. Old reports pulled. A case that had already been closed reopened. Margaret sat there watching it unfold, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. This time she wasn't grieving. She was waiting. Walk me through the identification again, another officer said, flipping through the report. Personal belongings matched, someone replied. Watch. Wedding ring. No facial confirmation. Body condition made that difficult. And DNA? Too long. Margaret's eyes lifted. Well, samples were collected, the officer said carefully, but the results were delayed due to lab backlog. The case proceeded based on circumstantial confirmation. Margaret leaned forward slowly. So you buried a man without ever proving it was him? No one answered immediately, because the truth was already there. Incomplete. Overlooked. Convenient. Another page turned. Another detail surfaced. Time of death estimation doesn't fully align with the last known movements, one officer muttered. Inconsistencies, another added quietly. Small cracks. But enough. Margaret exhaled sharply, something inside her tightening, sharpening. This wasn't a mistake. This was negligence. Or worse, because if there was no DNA confirmation, then there was never certainty. And if there was never certainty, then Daniel Collins was never officially proven dead, which meant he didn't come back. He was never gone. The confirmation didn't come loudly. It came quietly, clinically, almost casually. Ma'am, the forensic officer said, not meeting her eyes. We've expedited the DNA comparison. Margaret didn't sit, didn't breathe properly. Just say it. The remains do not match Daniel Collins. Not the kind that fills a room. The kind that empties it. Margaret blinked once. Slowly. No, she whispered. Not in denial. In realization. Because something inside her already knew. That body, her voice tightened, was never him? The officer shook his head. No, ma'am. Everything collapsed inward. Not grief this time. Not confusion. Something sharper. More personal. More violent. Margaret stepped back, her hand brushing against the edge of the table, as if she needed something solid to hold on to. 6 months. 6 months of mourning. Of breaking. Of burying a man who wasn't even there. Her lips parted, but the words came out fractured. You let me bury a stranger? No one answered. Because the real question had already taken form in her mind. And this time it wasn't directed at them. It was directed at him. Her eyes hardened. You knew. The thought hit harder than the truth itself. Every moment replayed. The silence. The distance. The perfect routine. The lies she didn't see because she never thought to look. Her breath shook. Daniel, she said under her breath. The name no longer soft, no longer familiar. You let me believe you were dead. A beat. Then the thought that broke everything open. How long have you been lying to me? The truth didn't stop at him being alive. It got worse. Much worse. Check his financial records, Margaret said, her voice no longer shaking, just cold. An officer hesitated. Ma'am, that could take. Do it. This time they did. What came back wasn't complicated. It was calculated. Loans. Multiple. Quietly taken over the past 2 years. Credit cards pushed to their limits. Payments missed, then hidden. Margaret stared at the report. He never told me. Because he couldn't pay it back, one officer replied. Not legally. Then another file. Insurance. Large. Recently updated. Margaret's eyes narrowed. When was this changed? 3 months before his disappearance. A beat. Everything aligned. Too clean. Too deliberate. He knew, she whispered. He planned this. The room shifted. Not confusion anymore. Structure. Intent. He disappears, Margaret continued, thinking out loud now. A body shows up. Identifiable items. No DNA confirmation. And I? Her voice cracked for a second, just one. I bury him. And the policy pays out, the officer finished quietly. Margaret laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was monstrous. He didn't just fake his death, she said, her eyes darkening. He sold it. No one interrupted. Because that was exactly what it was. A transaction. A trade. A man exchanging his identity for money and escape. But Margaret didn't feel shock anymore. She felt something hotter. He didn't just leave me, she said, her voice dropping lower. He erased himself and made me bury the lie. He let her believe her father was dead. The room felt smaller again. Tighter. Warmer. Anger was no longer building. It was moving. He didn't just disappear, she continued, pacing now. He staged it. Every detail. The car. The body. The ring. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. From pressure. From everything she had buried now forcing its way out. You don't do that to strangers, she said, almost laughing again, but this time it cut. You don't do that unless you're willing to destroy the people closest to you. A beat. He chose to destroy us. Silence followed, but it didn't calm anything. Because this wasn't grief anymore. This was betrayal. Raw. Direct. Unforgivable. And for the first time since she saw him in that store, Margaret didn't want answers. She wanted him to face what he had done. But the truth still wasn't finished with her. It twisted again. "Ma'am, there's more," the officer said carefully, sliding another document across the table. Margaret didn't sit this time. She just looked down. New name. New address. New identity. Clean. Too clean. "He didn't just disappear," she murmured. "He replaced himself." The officer nodded. "We believe he's been living under this identity for at least 4 months. 4 months. Margaret's mind calculated instantly. That meant he didn't just run after the funeral. He moved on quickly. Prepared. Her fingers tightened against the edge of the table. "He built a new life," she said, her voice flattening into something colder than anger. Then another file. Smaller. But heavier. "There are indications," the officer added, choosing his words, "that he may not be alone." Margaret didn't react immediately. Didn't blink. "Not alone," she repeated. The officer hesitated. "We can't confirm fully yet. But there have been consistent patterns, shared expenses, overlapping records." Margaret let out a short breath. Not disbelief. Recognition. Of course he wouldn't be alone. "Say it," she whispered. No one did. But she already saw it. Another home. Another routine. Another version of him living the same lies just with someone else. Her chest tightened not from grief, but from something sharper. More humiliating. "Was there another woman?" she asked quietly. No answer. And somehow that silence said everything. It didn't take long to find him. Not anymore. Once the new identity surfaced, everything else followed: address, routine, patterns. Daniel hadn't disappeared. He had relocated. Margaret stood across the street, staring at the house that wasn't supposed to exist. Lights on. Curtains half drawn. A life already in motion. "So this is where you've been," she whispered. Her hand tightened into a fist. The front door opened. Margaret didn't think. She moved. Fast. "Daniel." He froze. For a split second he didn't turn. Like he hoped the voice wasn't real. Then he did. And there it was again. That same look. Fear. But this time he couldn't run. Margaret closed the distance between them, her steps sharp, controlled, unstoppable. "You don't get to walk away this time," she said, her voice low but cutting. "Margaret, listen." "No," she snapped. "You listen." He stepped back instinctively, glancing toward the door behind him. Too late. She was already there. Blocking it. 6 months, she said, each word precise. 6 months I buried you. Grieved you. Broke because of you. Heavy. Then she took one final step closer. "Look at me." He did. And for the first time there was nowhere left for him to hide. For a second there was silence. Then it broke. "What did you do to us?" Margaret's voice exploded. Sharp, raw, uncontrollable. Daniel flinched. Not from the volume. From the truth behind it. "You let me bury you," she shouted, stepping closer. Her voice cracking under the weight of everything she had held in. You let your daughter cry over a coffin that didn't even have you inside. Margaret, I can explain. Explain what? She cut him off louder. That you ran? That you lied? That you watched us fall apart while you started over? Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. You stood there today, looked at me like I was the threat, she cried. Like I was the one who did something wrong. Daniel tried to speak again. Failed. Because there was nothing he could say that would survive this moment. I lost everything. Margaret's voice dropped for a split second, low, dangerous. My sleep. My job. My life. Then it surged again. And you? She stepped even closer, eyes burning. You just replaced us. Silence hit hard. Not empty. Explosive. Because this wasn't grief anymore. This was everything she had buried, finally breaking free. The silence didn't last. It shattered. Daniel Collins. A voice cut through the air. Sharp. Official. Margaret didn't turn. She didn't have to. Footsteps approached fast. Controlled. Certain. Police. Daniel's face changed instantly. Not guilt. Not regret. Panic. Real this time. No, wait. He started, stepping back. Eyes darting for an escape that no longer existed. Hands where we can see them, an officer commanded. Margaret stepped aside. Just enough. Not to protect him, but to let it happen. Two officers closed in. Firm. Precise. No hesitation. They grabbed his arms. Cold metal snapped around his wrists. Click. Final. This isn't what it looks like. Daniel tried voice breaking now. Fraud. Identity falsification. Insurance deception. The officer listed calmly. You're under arrest. Margaret watched. Didn't move. Didn't speak. Because for the first time in 6 months something aligned. Not emotionally. Not gently. But correctly. Daniel struggled once. Then stopped. Defeated. Exposed. And as they pulled him away, Margaret exhaled. Slow. Deep. Not relief. Something stronger. Justice. After they took him away, everything went quiet again. Not the same silence as before. This one felt colder. Margaret stood alone, watching the empty space where Daniel had just been. No anger now. No shouting. No chaos. Just clarity. I thought I lost you 6 months ago, she said softly, almost to herself. Then she shook her head. No, that's not true. Her eyes lowered, distant but steady. I lost you long before that. The realization didn't hurt the way she expected. It didn't break her. It settled. Because the man she had loved, the one in the photographs, the one who laughed at the same moments, the one who built a life beside her, he didn't disappear that day. He had been fading long before. Every lie, every secret, every step away from the truth, piece by piece, until there was nothing real left to hold on to. Margaret exhaled slowly. The man I loved, her voice dropped, quieter now but firm, was already gone. And somehow that truth felt more final than the grave ever did. Just before they pushed him into the car, it happened. A final look. Daniel turned his head. Not fully. Just enough. His eyes found Margaret again. For a second everything slowed. No anger now. No shouting. No excuses left to hide behind. Just him. Standing there in handcuffs. Exposed. Smaller than she remembered. Margaret, he started, his voice low, uncertain, almost pleading. She didn't move. Didn't answer. Didn't give him anything to hold on to. Because this time he had nothing left to control. No story to shape. No image to protect. Only the truth. And it didn't favor him. His gaze lingered, searching for something, recognition, sympathy, anything. He found none. Margaret's expression didn't break. Didn't soften. It stayed still. Detached. And that's when it hit him. Not the arrest. Not the charges. But this, he had lost her completely. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Quietly. Absolutely. The officer pushed him forward. The door slammed shut. And in that small final moment, Daniel Collins wasn't a man escaping anymore. He was just a man who had been seen for exactly who he was. The car pulled away. Just like that. No dramatic ending. No final words. Only distance. Margaret stood still, watching until it disappeared completely. Then even longer, like she needed to be sure it was real this time. Because once she had watched him leave before, and believed he was gone. She let out a slow breath. Cold. Steady. He came back, she whispered. But not for me. Then her eyes lifted. No longer searching, no longer waiting. Because the question wasn't about him anymore. It was about something deeper. Something unsettling. What do you do when the person you buried walks back into your life? Do you run? Do you forgive? Or do you realize the person you loved is no longer the one standing in front of you? Margaret didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't that someone returns from the dead. It's understanding why they had to disappear in the first place.